"You deceived my son, didn't you? You're after our money." My fiancé's mother, Debbie, yelled at me. That's not true. I was attracted to Glenn's personality. Even my direct and honest response seemed to fall on deaf ears with them. Glenn was also indignant, and despite repeatedly trying to talk, it appeared they weren't listening. Gradually, we began to feel that no matter what we said to his shocked parents, it would be meaningless. Is educational background and social status so important? Sure, I come from a single-parent family and might not be well educated, but I am confident in my work, and I see no reason to be insulted. I asserted firmly. This caused their expressions to darken. Glenn's father, Jake, sneered and pointed his finger, saying, "I'd like to see the face of a poor parent once." To that comment, I responded with a smile. They probably thought I was disheartened after being criticized repeatedly. Facing their skeptical looks, I began speaking with a bright smile. "If that's the case, let me introduce you to my father. My name is Olive Adams, and I'm 27 years old. Currently, I work as a pastry chef in an urban patisserie, dedicating my days to my passion for baking. Although it's busy, I lead a fulfilling life. The small but popular patisserie where I work has many regular customers and a warm workplace atmosphere. The environment is blessed with good relationships and a friendly hierarchy. The experiences I gain through daily mistakes are enjoyable to me. My inspiration to become a pastry chef came from my mother. As a child, the sweets my mother made seemed like sparkling jewels, and those memories are still vivid to me today. I want to be a pastry chef like my mother and make sweets that bring happiness to everyone," I told her, and she gave me a gentle smile in the kitchen. This vague memory is one of my precious memories with my mother. As you might guess, my mother passed away from illness when she was young. However, I did not feel a deep sense of loneliness. It's because of my father's deep love. Even before my mother's death, my father cherished the time spent with family and loved my mother deeply. When my mother passed away, despite his own grief, every time I cried remembering her, he would comfort me without showing his sadness, gently stroking my back. "Olive, Mom is always watching over us from heaven. I'll try my hardest for you, so why don't you also make an effort? Let's tell Mom that we're doing well," he said, smiling gently while patting my shoulder. I can still clearly remember that expression. It must have been a challenging time for my father. Despite being busy with work, he always prioritized our family and truly loved my mother. When I was too young to understand the pain caused by my mother's death, I was self-centered and couldn't see beyond myself. However, my father filled the emptiness left by my mother's absence by spending weekends with me and participating in school events. Thanks to my father's love, I was able to grow up without feeling lonely and decided to become a respectable adult for both my father and my mother in heaven. During high school, when thinking about my future career path, I found the profession of pastry chef appealing and discussed it with my father. I was influenced by the happy sight of my mother making sweets when I was a child. "Olive, you can choose the path you desire. I'll support whatever choice you make," my father answered with a warm smile. "Dad, thank you. If I become a pastry chef in the future, I'd like you to be my first customer. Just like Mom, I'll make sure you're happy, I blurted out, and my father shed tears. It was the first time I had ever seen tears in my father's eyes. As my mother's illness progressed, and even during her funeral, my father never showed me his tears. But at this moment he cried tears of joy and said, "You've grown up so well. The happiness of your father is knowing that you are happy, Olive, so grab your happiness. Always rely on me if you need anything." Encouraged by his words, I vowed to make both myself and the people around me happy. After graduating from high school and studying at a vocational school, I finally became the pastry chef I had dreamed of and started working at the current patisserie. There I met someone who I could cherish as much as my father, Glenn. Olive. Glenn. Sorry, I'm late. It's okay, you were at a meeting for a new cake design, right? I'm looking forward to the next product. Glenn has been a frequent visitor to the patisserie where I work, and through several visits we became close. Glenn works as a lawyer, and it seems that the staff at the law firm where he works enjoy our cakes. He visits regularly, always with a bright expression, and I am pleased that he praises the sweets I make. We even chat when it's quiet. Gradually we grew closer, and Glenn eventually asked me out on a date. I was initially drawn to Glenn's kind and gentle nature, and through our frequent meetings, I came to know more deeply about his charm. Eventually, we began dating and smoothly built our relationship. When our relationship reached a significant milestone, Glenn proposed marriage, and I gladly accepted. Later, we were to meet each other's parents, but this is where we faced a major obstacle: Glenn's parents. I had not yet met Glenn's parents, and Glenn had not yet told them about our relationship. Glenn has been unable to talk about this because he grew up receiving a lot of affection from his parents, which came with many restrictions on his relationships and romantic involvements. Glenn's family is proud of his success and boasts that he comes from a family line that he should be proud of. While they appear to be loving parents who support their son on the surface, Glenn revealed the truth to me. In fact, they want to control me. Even my friendships and academic choices have been guided by them. If the family of a friend I chose did not meet their standards, they would ruthlessly criticize and harm that family. If I resisted, the consequences would affect my friends. So I had no choice but to comply. That must be tough. However, I desire a future with you more than anything, Olive. That feeling will never change. I have given up much in the past, but marrying you is something I cannot concede. Glenn spoke passionately, and his sincere attitude moved me. I am grateful that Glenn cherishes me so much, and I too wish to be with him forever. Therefore, I am determined to do everything I can to get his parents to accept our marriage. Don't worry. I will make an effort to get them to accept us. Our family may be from a single parent, but my father has fulfilled his position, and I take pride in my work. As I began to speak, Glenn's eyes widened in surprise, but he soon smiled and nodded in agreement. I believe that together we can overcome any difficulty. The formal introduction to Glenn's parents is still ahead, but for now, Glenn will meet my father. In fact, Glenn had met my father several times before, and this time it was almost a formal announcement of our marriage. Upon hearing this, my father smiled warmly and nodded. Congratulations. I am more than happy to entrust Olive to you, Glenn. Please take good care of her. Thank you, father-in-law. I will definitely make Olive happy, Glenn responded. No need to worry. I've heard a lot about you from Olive. I'm good at judging people, my father said with a laugh, and I couldn't see what he was thinking behind that smile. After receiving my father's blessing, Glenn started, I'd like to talk a bit about my parents, and began to slowly share his family story. His parents hold traditional values dearly and were strict about Glenn's choice of friends. As a result, many of Glenn's friends left due to excessive interference. There were times when he was seen talking to friends whom his parents disapproved of, and he was criticized. Frankly, the topics Glenn openly discussed felt very harsh to me. I was surprised at the excessive involvement in a child's friendships, and especially judging others based on appearances, education levels, and family situations. I see. That must have been a tough experience. If anything is said about family structure, they will probably criticize me as well, my father said, and I could see Glenn taking a deep breath. As Glenn apologized, my father quietly shook his head. As I had heard before, Glenn's parents are people who look down on those with low educational levels and single-parent families. I knew there would be obstacles to this marriage. No matter how excellent a manager my father is, to Glenn's parents, I am just a woman raised by a single parent. Glenn understands this fact and had discussed this issue with my father beforehand. No, I will do whatever it takes to get them to accept my marriage to Olive. Reality does come with difficulties. Having lived with such parents for many years, you understand how hard it can be, Glenn said, and my father quietly responded. Dad, I called out, and my father slowly smiled. I'm not denying it, but I feel it's important to seek adult support. Even though you are both adults, you are always our beloved children. Ideally, anyone should receive a lot of support in difficult times. Please feel free to rely on me when you are in trouble. I will surely be helpful then. What does that mean? I asked, but my father did not give a specific answer. However, his expression when he said to call him if I truly found myself in dire straits was the warmest I had ever seen. I understood the meaning of that on the day we went to greet Glenn's family. I had informed my father of the visit's schedule in advance. His smile as he saw us off was heartwarming. Please be assured I am here. If they say anything rude, I will definitely protect you, Glenn said, preparing himself mentally. I can withstand any words. I am ready. This was my first visit to Glenn's home. As I had heard, the house was incredibly large, and I approached it nervously. And the moment we arrived, I was simply stunned by the grandeur of Glenn's house. This is beyond my imagination, a bit too big, a solid gate and a vast property. There was a flowing waterfall in the garden, and well-maintained plants swayed in the wind. I already knew that Glenn came from a prestigious family and was a graduate of a renowned university, but I was surprised by the luxurious house befitting his family's status. I was anxious about whether I would be accepted, but I quickly corrected myself. Just as Glenn's family judges people based on appearances and educational backgrounds, I reconsidered and thought that I should not judge them based on first impressions. When I pressed the doorbell at the entrance, a clear voice soon greeted us. When Glenn introduced himself, a butler and maids quickly came to greet us. I was still filled with a sense of unfamiliarity at the sight. After that, Glenn led me into his house. Glenn, a cheerful voice rang out, and there stood a woman in a bright dress and a man in a fine suit. They expressed joy upon seeing Glenn and embraced his shoulders. "Welcome back, Glenn. I've been looking forward to meeting your fiancé. And this is? Let's talk inside," they said, and I felt their eyes examining me carefully, but I kept the details in my heart. It was clear these two were Glenn's parents, and I greeted them with a smile, filled with respect. Led into a formal reception room, I greeted Glenn's parents with a bit of nervousness. "Nice to meet you. I apologize for the delayed introduction. I'm Olive Adams, and I am in a relationship with Glenn. I look forward to getting to know you both better." Olive and I met at the cake shop where she works. Our office staff likes the cakes from that shop and buys them frequently. I was drawn to her bright, hard-working, and kind personality, and I want to spend my future with her. Glenn's parents, Debbie and Jake, listened quietly to our sincere conversation. When there was a pause in the conversation, Debbie took a deep breath before asking, "Olive, which university did you graduate from?" "Actually, I didn't go to university. Influenced by my mother, I aimed to be a pastry chef and graduated from a vocational school." Debbie's face clouded over at my answer, which I had anticipated. She values educational background, so it was clear how she would view someone with only a vocational school background. "Currently, I am pursuing my dream and working as a pastry chef at a patisserie." Despite my answer, Debbie did not look particularly pleased. So, "I'm surprised by your educational background. Was it a meeting at the shop? Did you approach him proactively?" "Mom, stop," Glenn interjected, but Debbie coldly replied, "The background of the meeting and educational history are important, right? I want to assess if you are suitable for Glenn." She ignored Glenn's interjection. Moreover, Jake looked down on me, saying, "Being a pastry chef is quite a tough job, I hear. With the development of AI, it might even disappear in the future. Was your mother also a pastry chef?" "No, my mother made sweets as a hobby, but I wanted to become a pastry chef to make people happy like she did," I replied, to which Jake scoffed, "Sounds quite childish." I felt anger at his words and clenched my fists. The insult was worse than I had anticipated. Their looks clearly contained mockery. They did not try to understand my humanity, they simply questioned my background to belittle me. Far exceeding the actions of good parents, Glenn finally lost his patience and shouted, "That's enough. I cannot accept you both treating my fiancé this way." "Glenn, don't worry." As I tried to calm Glenn down, Debbie's voice overlapped. "Really, if you're marrying into Peterson Design, you can't falter over something like this." Prompted by her words, I lifted my face. I thought over and kept in mind the words I heard at that moment. Peterson Design is a renowned, top-tier furniture manufacturer, a name I've heard of even though I'm not familiar with that industry. Actually, I had heard the name of the company before in another context. Recalling my father's warm smile, I narrowed my eyes slightly. I see. That's what it is. If that's the case, I already have a strong supporter, so there's no need to worry. As my anxiety dissolved, Debbie pressed further. Still, I wonder how your mother ever allowed you to become a pastry chef. I hope she doesn't regret it, though I doubt it. My mother has passed away, so I don't know, but she always supported me since I was a child, so I think she would be happy to see me walking my own path now. Eh? Passed away? Are you, by any chance, raised in a single-parent family? At my response, they showed expressions of astonishment. I nodded without being perturbed. My mother passed away when I was little, and my father raised me on his own. Their reaction was as expected. Upon hearing my story, Debbie began to get emotional. You deceived my son, didn't you? You're after our money, Debbie yelled at me. Sigh. I didn't think you would be so greedy. I never imagined they would criticize me this much. I didn't intend to raise my voice, but I ended up doing so anyway. Is educational background and social status so important? Sure, I come from a single-parent family and might not be well educated, but I am confident in my work, and I see no reason to be insulted, I asserted firmly. Their expressions changed drastically with my words. Jake scoffed and pointed at me, saying, "Ah, this is what poverty looks like. Give me a break." I never said my family was poor. Yet, simply because I come from a single-parent family, they concluded we were poor and showered me with accusations. I don't wish to associate with such people, but I do want to marry Glenn. For that to happen, they need to go through a tough experience. I'd like to see the face of a poor parent once. To that comment, I responded with a smile. They probably thought I was disheartened after being criticized repeatedly. Facing their skeptical looks, I began speaking with a bright smile. If that's the case, let me introduce you to my father. I'll call my father right now to come here. Glenn seemed shocked that I was actually going to call my father. His parents did not seem to take my statement seriously. They had an attitude of go ahead and try. Yes, let's have him come over. Then we can talk about our child's education again. Yes, that sounds good. I immediately contacted my father. As I left the room, they still hurled criticisms at me, but I didn't care at all. Glenn apologized repeatedly as we left the room, expressing his regret throughout. I'm truly sorry. I can't believe they can be so terrible. I'm a disgrace as their son. I'm even prepared to leave the house. Thank you. But they're going to have a tough time this time, so I'm apologizing in advance. Glenn looked surprised at my words. I briefly explained a certain truth to him. Upon learning the fact, Glenn smirked secretly. I see. I fully support that. Let's make them regret their past actions. We eagerly awaited my father's arrival. Soon after, my father contacted us, and Glenn invited us to his home. As we stepped into the living room, Glenn's parents looked at us with a mocking gaze. However, the moment they saw my father, their expressions froze. Why? Ah, Mr. Adams, why are you here? My daughter is going to be looked after by the Peterson family, so I came to greet you. I didn't expect you to be Glenn's parents. Faced with my father's calm smile, they seemed unable to move. Their faces paled as they looked around, and no trace of their previous bravado could be seen. So, it has come to this after all. You predicted this, didn't you, Dad? That's why you asked me to call you if there was any problem, right? My father nodded slightly at my statement. In fact, my father is a well-known executive who oversees a wide range of businesses in the interior design industry. After hearing about Glenn's parents from him, my father had realized that Jake was the president of Peterson Design. Peterson Design is one of the many companies that my father has financed and supported, and Glenn's parents were unaware of this fact. Also, it should be noted that my father's investment was the catalyst for the company's development. This information all comes from my father. Upon realizing that the one who supported their company is my father, their faces turned pale and they were lost for words. My father looked at them coldly and said, "Judging my daughter as poor just because she comes from a single-parent home, and accusing her of being after money is unacceptable. I have not let my daughter want for anything. And I do not wish for anyone to interfere in the genuine relationship between these two. I am truly disappointed to learn that the president of Peterson Design has such a character. Please wait. That's not what I meant. I didn't mean it that way. Not your intention. Then what was your intention? You belittle a profession my daughter respects and intrude on the private matters of a family you know nothing about. It clearly feels malicious." Faced with my father's remarks, they had no room to argue and fell silent. I considered how we could possibly improve the situation, but could not find any way to turn things around. It was such a situation. It is all their own responsibility. I never felt that they had the intention to accept me from the beginning. They probably felt disgruntled that their well-raised son was going to be tied to a woman from a single-parent home. Still, I wish they had shown a willingness to understand from the start. I will sever ties with a company that treats my daughter this way. I will also withdraw my support going forward, my father declared quietly, and upon hearing those words, they turned pale and nearly burst into tears, desperately pleading, "We're sorry. Please reconsider that decision. We truly regret it. We approve of everything including marriage. We approve, so please." They were cornered and uttered those words out of desperation. But I could not accept their attitude of approving our marriage for such reasons. It was infuriating that they prioritized their own interests over understanding me and genuinely accepting Glenn's feelings, even showing disdain for their own loving son. Just as I was about to speak, Glenn quietly said, "Please stop." I was struck by the emotion from Glenn, who was usually calm and mild-mannered, rarely showing anger, and then he looked at his parents with a stern gaze unlike anything I had seen before. "You insulted Olive just now, and then you quickly agreed to the engagement just because you felt financially cornered. Is that a normal behavior? It's all just to satisfy your own desires. I can't stand it anymore. Don't hurt Olive any further. I intend to sever my relationship with you through my marriage to Olive." At Glenn's resolute statement, his parents were shocked and their eyes widened. Debbie, unable to hide her agitation, moved closer to Glenn as if pleading. "Please. Glenn, say you're joking. After all, we've raised you? Is that truly for me? My education and friendships have always been controlled by you. I thought enduring was my role. But then someone important came into my life, and I realized I can't maintain the status quo. I am grateful to you, but I can no longer bear to look at you." Glenn, Debbie cried out, tears starting to flow as she faced rejection from her beloved son. The sight of Debbie drowning in tears, rather than evoking sympathy, seemed ludicrous to me. Glenn declared firmly to his parents, "My decision is firm." This is such a shameful thing. As Jake exclaimed, my father calmly countered, "Glenn has done nothing to be ashamed of." While glaring at Jake, my father continued speaking, placing his hand on Glenn's shoulder, as if conveying a message of confidence. I closely observed Glenn slightly narrowing his eyes. "He explained everything about you carefully when we met to exchange greetings. He also promised to protect Olive. It was you who ignored Glenn's feelings and acted treacherously. You thought he would not oppose you because he would never use his warmth against you. I truly do not want to be a parent like you. I've decided not to accept my mother's controlling attitude anymore." In front of Glenn, who had made this firm declaration, his parents were so surprised that they could find no words to reply, just staring at us blankly. Our greeting ended in such a manner. To avoid pointless arguments, Glenn, together with my father and me, left his parents' home, having solidified his decision to cut ties with them. "Olive, I'm sorry for the terrible treatment you went through. Father-in-law, I truly apologize." It's ridiculous for you to apologize when you haven't done anything wrong. And those two think of themselves far more than they think of Glenn. It makes me so angry to see that. Glenn laughed at my words, his face looking as if a weight had been lifted off him. Although it was unpleasant, I felt fortunate that we could clarify our relationship with his parents before our wedding. We're no longer children dependent on our parents as independent adults. We can make our own decisions. There's absolutely no need to worry. While we no longer have family support from his parents, Glenn, who is making a name for himself as a young attorney, is considered a rising star at his law firm. I always thought enduring would solve the problem, but it was an unavoidable situation. It's really good that it became clear this time. Indeed. Well done, Glenn. Afterward, we were able to have our wedding as planned. Originally, we intended to cover it with our savings, but my father contributed more than expected, making the wedding truly wonderful, reminding us how great it is to have parental support. Naturally, we did not invite Glenn's parents to the wedding. Debbie, who deeply loves Glenn, seemed devastated by this fact. Debbie, previously active, is now reclusive, staying at home without going out. Seeing Debbie change so dramatically, Jake asked for a reversal of the estrangement, but Glenn refused his request. I thought it might have been excessive, but in the end, they just want me back for their own benefit. I've decided not to think about it anymore. Even after the wedding, Glenn's parents tried to contact us multiple times. However, after Glenn warned them he would consider legal action if they didn't stop contacting him, the communication finally ceased. Taking legal action against the family might not seem realistic, but just suggesting it made them stop contacting immediately. I'm even planning to change my phone number. I'm really fed up with their selfish behavior. Seeing Glenn's wry smile, I was at a loss for what to say. Even though he chose to sever ties, making such a decision against his own parents must have been incredibly hard for him. Hoping to ease those painful memories even slightly, I felt a strong desire to cherish every moment we spend together from now on. Here's the story I heard from my father about Peterson Design. When my father communicated his decision to stop supporting Peterson Design to his business contacts, the company's performance rapidly deteriorated. My father highly values the trust he has built with his business partners over the years, and all the companies believed his words. As a result, Peterson Design lost its major dealings one after another and quickly went bankrupt after its arrogant behavior toward its partners came to light. When the business became unmanageable, they reached out to various contacts for help, but no one extended a helping hand due to their past dishonest dealings. Consequently, the company Glenn's parents managed found itself in a situation beyond repair, a just end for years of prioritizing their interests and disregarding others. For many years, they depended on major companies and benefited from this dependency. But this delicate balance was disrupted when my father became aware of the dependency. This has made it extremely difficult for them to regain their footing in the interior design industry. They had no choice but to accept responsibility and face the consequences. When my father shared this fact with me, he did so with a calm smile, comforting me that if Glenn feels any pressure, he is always ready to listen. His words at that time were, "If Glenn ever feels responsible for what has happened, please feel free to discuss it with me." "Yes, Dad, thank you," I replied, and my father added, "You and Glenn have nothing to worry about. I hope you two have a happy life together." Moved by my father's gentle smile and his words, I felt deeply warmed. My father has always watched over my growth, accepted Glenn, the partner I chose, and fully supported our relationship. His presence is invaluable to me. Even through the sadness of losing my mother, my father was always by my side, cherishing our time together. His deep love has shaped who I am today and provides a strong foundation that supports me. Having learned from my father the importance of respecting others and showing love through concrete actions, I deeply understand the importance of maintaining gratitude as we move forward. I feel incredibly fortunate to have met a husband who shares and understands these sentiments. As I move forward in life, I vow to never forget this gratitude and to offer support and compassion to the important people around me, just as my father has shown me. I sincerely hope to interact with others with love and respect, just as my father has demonstrated. Elizabeth Gray, aged 38, was gazing at the sunset over the Hudson River from her office on the top floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan. Her digital marketing company, Nexus Innovations, had experienced rapid growth in recent years and was listed among the Fortune 500. Elizabeth took a deep breath, feeling a sense of satisfaction after another day's work. However, there was a hint of anxiety in her expression. She was 7 months pregnant with twins, and balancing work and home life had become increasingly difficult. "Elizabeth, the materials for tomorrow's meeting are ready," her secretary, Jessica, called out. "Thank you, Jessica." "I'll check them first thing tomorrow morning," Elizabeth replied with a smile. Upon leaving the office and arriving at her upscale apartment, Elizabeth saw her husband James, 40, deeply engrossed in a phone conversation. He was a well-known investment banker, and their marriage was the envy of many. "Ah, Elizabeth, welcome home." James ended the call and approached his wife with a slightly flustered demeanor. "How was your day?" Elizabeth felt something off in her husband's attitude, but chose not to probe deeply. As usual. "I secured a contract with a new client." "That's wonderful," James said, but his eyes seemed preoccupied with something else. That night, after finishing a business call, Elizabeth heard voices from the study as she walked down the hallway. It was James and his mother, Caroline. "Yes, we need to sort it out by Jennifer's birthday." Caroline's voice was audible. "I understand, Mom, but I'm not sure how to bring it up with Elizabeth," James responded. Elizabeth paused and listened intently, her heart beginning to race. There's no choice for her. One of the twins must be given to Jennifer. She has a right to have a child. Caroline's voice was cold. Elizabeth's mind went blank. She held her breath and listened more closely to the conversation. "But Mom, it's illegal and unethical," James weakly objected. "It's the only way for your sister to be happy." "It's for the family, James." Elizabeth felt her legs wobble. Her mind raced through the events of her life like a whirlwind. The day of her wedding, Caroline's cold gaze, Jennifer's snide remarks, and the sudden change in their behavior after she announced her pregnancy. Everything connected. She quietly returned to her room and sat on the bed. Her hands trembled and cold sweat ran down her back. Elizabeth placed her hands on her stomach and spoke to her unborn twins. "It's going to be all right. Mommy will protect you." That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep at all. She spent the entire night thinking about what she should do next. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up earlier than usual and acted cautiously. She left the house before James woke up and headed to the office. Upon arriving at the office, Elizabeth immediately took action. First, she contacted a trustworthy lawyer. "Sarah, it's an emergency. Can we meet right now?" An hour later, Elizabeth was confessing everything in Sarah's office. "Elizabeth, this is serious. We need to act immediately," Sarah said with a grave expression. "I understand. But what should I do?" Elizabeth's voice trembled. "First, we need to gather evidence. Then, ensure your and the baby's safety. We should also start preparing for a divorce lawsuit." Elizabeth nodded. She could feel her life was about to change drastically. From that day, Elizabeth began to lead a double life. On the surface, she acted as if nothing was wrong, while secretly preparing to escape. Every day, she slowly moved out necessary items, opened a new bank account, and searched for a safe residence, all for the sake of protecting her unborn children. And she waited for the day James would leave on a business trip. Elizabeth was reminiscing about her wedding day with James 10 years ago. The luxurious ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, hundreds of guests, and Caroline's icy gaze. "Oh, Elizabeth, where did you buy that dress?" Caroline had asked sarcastically. "It's Vera Wang," Elizabeth replied proudly. "Well, it's adequate," Caroline snorted dismissively. Since that day, the relationship between Elizabeth and Caroline had been frosty. Jennifer, Elizabeth's sister-in-law, followed Caroline's lead and continued to treat Elizabeth coldly. Elizabeth immersed herself in her career to escape this situation and eventually founded Nexus Innovations, achieving great success. However, everything changed when her pregnancy was revealed. "Well, Elizabeth, twins, isn't that wonderful?" Caroline suddenly became friendly. "I'll plan the baby shower," Jennifer offered excitedly. Elizabeth couldn't hide her confusion, but she accepted their offers, thinking it might be a chance for reconciliation. Now, everything was clear. Their change in behavior was a scheme to take one of the twins. Elizabeth remembered when she met James. It was 6 years ago, when she was still working at a small advertising agency. One day, during a presentation for a major bank's advertising campaign, she met James, who attended as the bank's representative. During the presentation, Elizabeth confidently explained her ideas. James seemed captivated by her passion and creativity. After the presentation, James approached her. "Excellent presentation, Ms. Gray." "Thank you," Elizabeth smiled. That was the beginning of their relationship. James frequently invited Elizabeth out for meals, and they quickly grew close. Elizabeth was drawn to James's kindness and intelligence. He supported her career and seemed to understand her dreams, or at least she thought so. When she decided to marry him, Elizabeth was filled with happiness. However, on the day she first met James's family, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. "It's okay. They'll like you," James tried to reassure her. But the reality was harsh. Caroline and Jennifer had no intention of accepting her from the start. "James, are you sure about her?" Caroline whispered to her son, loud enough for Elizabeth to hear. "Mom, Elizabeth is a wonderful person," James responded, but his voice lacked conviction. Since then, family gatherings have always been filled with stress. Elizabeth tried desperately to be accepted, but the barriers erected by Caroline and Jennifer were thick. James found himself caught in the middle and gradually began to distance himself from Elizabeth. Elizabeth threw herself into her career as a way to escape this situation and made Nexus Innovations a huge success. However, her success did not solve her domestic problems. It only fueled Caroline and Jennifer's jealousy. "That woman is getting too cocky," Jennifer sneered. "James, she's using your position," Caroline incited her son. Elizabeth felt the man she thought she loved gradually drifting away from her. Now, everything was clear. Her life, her love, and even her unborn children were in danger. Elizabeth resolved never to let anyone control her life again. Above all, she was determined to protect her unborn children. She stood up quietly and looked out the window. The Manhattan nightscape spread out before her. In this city she had built everything, and now she was ready to leave it all behind. Elizabeth took a deep breath. The next day, a new life would begin. Shaking with emotion, Elizabeth carefully plotted her course of action. She contacted Sarah, a longtime friend and lawyer. "Sarah, it's an emergency. Can we meet first thing tomorrow morning?" Elizabeth's voice trembled over the phone. The next morning, Elizabeth revealed everything to Sarah in her office. "Elizabeth, this is serious. We need to act now," Sarah said with a grave expression. The two devised a meticulous plan. Elizabeth began to discreetly remove important company documents and personal belongings from her office. "But what about the company?" Sarah asked. Elizabeth took a deep breath. "I'll temporarily leave it in the hands of Mark, the vice president. He can handle it." A few days later, seizing the opportunity while James was on a business trip, Elizabeth made her move. "Lisa, I need to take a few days off for an urgent matter. Please cancel all my appointments," she instructed her secretary over the phone. Elizabeth picked up the suitcase she had prepared and left her apartment. She headed to a safe location arranged by Sarah. In the taxi, Elizabeth reflected on her decision. Running away and leaving everything behind was a choice she had never imagined making. However, she was convinced that it was the only way to ensure the safety of her children. Upon arriving at the safe location, Elizabeth took a deep breath. The small apartment was nothing compared to the luxurious apartment she was accustomed to, but it offered her freedom. That night, James called multiple times. "Elizabeth, where are you?" "I'm worried about you," his voice left on the voicemail. Elizabeth did not respond. Her priority was the safety of herself and her unborn children. A few days later, Elizabeth met with Sarah again. "Everything is ready," Sarah said. "All the divorce papers are prepared." Elizabeth nodded. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what I would have done without you." "It's okay, Elizabeth. You are a strong woman. You will get through this." That afternoon, Elizabeth went to the hospital for a routine checkup. "Ms. Gray, the twins are doing well," the doctor informed her with a smile. "You'll be giving birth soon." Elizabeth's face showed relief, but at the same time, she felt anxious about the life that lay ahead. When Elizabeth left the hospital, she unexpectedly encountered someone familiar, her father-in-law, Robert. "Elizabeth." Robert approached her, looking surprised. Elizabeth tensed up, but there was no hostility in Robert's eyes, only sadness. "I know." "About Caroline and Jennifer's plan," Robert said in a low voice. Elizabeth gasped. "I couldn't stop them." "I'm sorry," Robert continued, "but I think your decision is the right one." Elizabeth was lost for words. Robert took her hand. "You're in a safe place, aren't you? Stay there. I won't tell anyone." Elizabeth nodded, holding back tears. "Thank you." "Father-in-law." Robert smiled kindly. "Be happy, Elizabeth, and take good care of my grandchildren." They parted ways, and Elizabeth quickly left. A flicker of hope lit up in her heart. That night, Elizabeth wrote a long letter. It was a farewell letter to James. "Dear James, I must inform you that our marriage has come to an end. I have learned about the plan you, your mother, and your sister had to take our children. I cannot believe you would try to steal our children. I am starting a new life with our children, and you will not see them. Legal proceedings will be conducted through my lawyer. Goodbye, James. I hope someday you understand the true meaning of family. Elizabeth." After posting the letter, Elizabeth took a deep breath. With that, her ties to her old life were finally severed. A new chapter was beginning. Elizabeth placed her hands on her stomach, speaking to her unborn children. "It's going to be all right. Mommy will definitely make you both happy." 1 week after Elizabeth's sudden disappearance, the first hearing regarding her divorce and custody took place at the New York Family Court. Upon entering the courtroom, Elizabeth saw James and his family. Caroline's eyes were filled with hatred. "I will never allow your plan to succeed," Elizabeth declared firmly. James stood up, his face pale. "Elizabeth, let's talk. I will explain everything." However, Elizabeth shook her head. "It's too late, James." The judge banged the gavel, and the hearing began. Sarah, acting as Elizabeth's attorney, engaged in a fierce legal battle with James's lawyer. "Our client has evidence of a plan to transfer one of the twins, who are still in the womb, to another person," Sarah asserted strongly. James's lawyer desperately countered, "There is no such plan. This is all a misunderstanding." However, When Elizabeth's recorded conversation was presented as evidence, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Suddenly, Jennifer stood up and shouted, "I have a right to have children. Elizabeth, you only think about your own happiness." The judge sternly admonished Jennifer, "Any further disruption will be considered contempt of court." The hearing lasted several hours. Ultimately, the judge made a provisional ruling. At this point, the safety of the unborn twins is the priority. I grant temporary sole custody to Mrs. Elizabeth Gray. Mr. James Gray and his family are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Elizabeth Gray without court permission. Elizabeth's face showed relief. Although this was just the beginning of a long legal battle, her immediate safety was assured. As she left the courtroom, Elizabeth and James made eye contact. Regret was evident in his eyes, but Elizabeth did not look back. That night, Elizabeth was in her hotel room, reflecting on the long day when she suddenly heard a knock at the door. Cautiously opening it, she found Robert standing there. "Elizabeth, I need to talk," Robert said quietly. Elizabeth hesitated, but then invited Robert into her room. "I couldn't stop Caroline and Jennifer's actions, and I failed to persuade James." "I am truly sorry," Robert apologized. Elizabeth silently listened to his words. "However, your decision was the right one," Robert continued. "I want to offer all the support I can." Elizabeth, with tears in her eyes, hugged Robert. "Thank you." Father-in-law. The trial continued for several weeks. Elizabeth and Sarah desperately fought against the attacks from James's side. Eventually, the court granted Elizabeth full custody. Furthermore, a restraining order was issued against James and his family. The moment the judgment was pronounced, Elizabeth let out a deep sigh of relief. The long battle had finally ended. As she left the courtroom, Elizabeth looked back at James. He sat there, devastated. For a moment, Elizabeth felt a pang of sympathy, but it quickly faded. Now, it was time for a new life. Time to build a happy future with her children. 2 months later, Elizabeth safely delivered twins, a boy and a girl, at a hospital in Boston. She named her son Michael and her daughter Sophia. Holding Michael and Sophia in the hospital room, Elizabeth cried tears of joy, relief, and new resolve. "I will protect you both, no matter what," she vowed to the twins. After being discharged, Elizabeth spoke with her lawyer Sarah over the phone. "The final judgment is in, Elizabeth. It's a complete victory for you. You have been granted full custody." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Thank you, Sarah. I truly appreciate everything." Subsequently, Elizabeth began her new life. She opened a new office in Boston and expanded Nexus innovations throughout the East Coast. Balancing parenting and work was never easy. However, Elizabeth overcame the challenges with her inherent strength and determination. Michael and Sophia grew up healthy, maturing day by day. Every time Elizabeth saw her children's smiles, she felt reassured that her decisions were right. One day, while walking with the twins in the park, Elizabeth unexpectedly encountered her father-in-law, Robert. "Elizabeth." Robert called out, looking surprised. Elizabeth tensed up, but there was no hostility in Robert's expression. I want to apologize," Robert stammered. "I couldn't stop Caroline and Jennifer's actions, and I failed to persuade James. I am truly sorry." Elizabeth hesitated for a moment but eventually nodded slowly. "Thank you, Robert. I'm glad to hear your words." "May I see my grandchildren?" Robert asked hopefully. Elizabeth thought deeply. The wounds of the past were not easily healed. However, she felt that for her children's sake, she should not completely close off the possibility of building new relationships. Please give me some time. It's still too early, but someday, surely. Robert nodded in understanding. Holding the twins, Elizabeth looked to the future. She had overcome difficulties and carved out a new life on her own. And now she had precious lives to protect. What the future held was uncertain. However, Elizabeth was confident. Together with her beloved children, she was sure they could build a happy future. Elizabeth reaffirmed her vow. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would protect and continue to love her children. That was her chosen path and her happy life. On Michael and Sophia's 10th birthday, Elizabeth received a special letter. It was from James. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope, and inside was a lengthy letter. Dear Elizabeth, 10 years have passed, and I finally found the courage to write to you. First, I must deeply apologize. I still regret my weakness and foolishness at that time. I succumbed to the pressure from my mother and Jennifer and made the choice to lose the person I loved most and our children. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Over the past decade, I've deeply reflected on my actions and have been receiving counseling. I've also come to understand the true meaning of family. I have been watching Michael and Sophia grow from afar. Knowing that they are happy and healthy brings me immense relief, and I understand that it is all thanks to your strength and love. I am well aware that I have no right to be involved with the children. However, if possible, I would someday like to meet them. Even if I can't be involved as a father, I hope to at least touch a part of their lives. Of course, this considers your and the children's wishes first. If you say it's not possible, I will accept that. Elizabeth, I have the utmost respect for your courage and strength, and I am grateful for how wonderfully you have raised our children. Lastly, I apologize once again from the bottom of my heart, and I truly wish you and the children happiness. From James. After reading the letter, Elizabeth exhaled deeply. A whirlwind of emotions swirled inside her: anger, sadness, and a trace of sympathy. She stood by the window, watching Michael and Sophia play in the garden. The twins were running around energetically, and their laughter reached her in the room. Elizabeth smiled. For the past 10 years, she had devoted everything to raising her children, and her efforts had borne fruit. Michael and Sophia had grown into wise, compassionate children. She looked at the letter again. James's words seemed sincere. However, the wounds of the past were not so easily healed. Elizabeth decided. She could not immediately welcome James back into her children's lives. However, she would not completely close off the possibility. She sat at her desk and began writing a response letter. Dear James, I received your letter and, honestly, it left me with mixed feelings. The past cannot be changed, and its impact still lingers in our lives. However, I have chosen to look forward and live for Michael and Sophia's sake. The children are growing up healthy and happy. They do not yet know about you, but the day will come when I will share the truth with them. When that time arrives, I will respect their feelings. At the moment, I am not considering direct visits. However, if the children grow older and decide for themselves that they want to meet you, I will not stand in their way. Until then, I can commit to sending you an annual update about the children, including photos. I cannot promise more than this at this time. Sincerely, Elizabeth. She placed the letter in an envelope, wrote the address, and before taking it to the post office, she looked out at the garden once more. Michael and Sophia were happily collaborating on something in the sandbox, chatting and laughing as they worked together. Elizabeth felt a warmth in her chest. Her life had taken an unexpected direction, but she had no regrets. She called out to the children, Michael, Sophia. "It's snack time." The twins ran into the house with glee. Elizabeth hugged them and kissed their foreheads. "Mom, we love you," they both exclaimed in unison. Elizabeth smiled. "I love you too." She set the letter aside. She would take it to the post office the next day. For now, she was going to enjoy the time with her precious ones. That was Elizabeth's new life. 10 years ago, she made a tough decision and stepped into the unknown. Now, she has treasures beyond measure. Elizabeth reaffirmed her vow. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would protect and continue to love her children. That was her chosen path and her happy life.